Hello again, Year 4. I'm going to read you Tutankhamun's Arrow, Chapter 3. The black cat narrowed its yellow eyes, turned, and padded down a carved stone staircase. Neither Joe nor Lucy moved. "Let's follow it," said Lucy. Joe bit his lip. Everything was getting a bit too spooky. Lucy stepped onto the staircase. "We'll call it research," she said, as lightly as she could manage. "It is my history project, after all." Lucy and Joe tiptoed after the cat and came to a huge room with high painted columns and a tiled floor. Slatted blinds covered the windows, and it was cool and shady after the hot sun. At the far end of the room was a raised platform. In the middle of the platform stood something that looked very much like a throne. Lucy sniffed. There was a peculiar smell. The air smelled sweet, but sharp at the same time. "It looks like someone's having a party," whispered Joe. He wrinkled his nose and pointed. At the other end of the room was a long table laid with plates of spicy beans and round, flat loaves of bread. In the middle was a big bowl of marinated onions. On either side were mounds of fresh figs and dates, apricots and grapes. Lucy grinned. Joe liked his food as simple as possible. Mango-flavoured ice cream was about as exotic as he got. She took 2 steps towards the table, her eyes fixed on a fresh fig. At that moment they heard a low rumbling of voices and the sound of clumping feet. One voice rose above the rest. It was deep and echoing, like the howl of a wolf. "We shall wait for a sign." Joe felt his spine shiver and go cold. "Where can we hide?" he cried. They both turned and saw it at the same time. Under the stairs was a big painted box. All ideas of figs disappeared from Lucy's mind. The only problem was that her legs felt as if they were made of stone. "I can't move," she whispered. The voices grew nearer. Joe half dragged his sister to the box, and somehow they clambered in. Just as he was shutting the lid, the black cat jumped in with them. "Oh no," whispered Joe. "Now what am I going to do?" But Lucy was concentrating too hard to reply. To stop herself shaking, she was trying to imagine what the people who were coming into the room looked like. She could hear the blinds being pulled up, and could see light through the cracks in the box. She thought of the pictures she had seen at the British Museum. The men wore tunics and headdresses. The women wore lots of jewellery, painted their eyes black, and dyed their nails and skin red. Inside the box, Lucy could smell their perfume. It was a mixture of something sweet and something musky that made their eyes water. Suddenly, the room was silent. "Pardon, Great One," said a man's low voice. "How long shall we wait?" There was a scrape of a heavy chair. "The ceremony cannot begin until the gods send us a sign," replied the woman with a low, howling voice. "But what of our king?" said another. He sounded sharp and insistent. "He waits to travel to the underworld." "The last journey of Tutankhamun will begin when the gods are ready," said the low, howling voice. "We must wait for the sign." Joe gritted his teeth in the darkness. A terrible tickling feeling was crawling up his nose. He knew what was going to happen, and he knew there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. A split second later he sneezed. "Achoo!" It was the loudest, most spluttery sneeze ever. Lucy didn't know if she was shaking with fear or hysterical laughter. Whichever it was, her head felt like it was going to explode. "Open the box!" ordered the sharp voice. "Open the box! Open the box!" It sounded like the punchline of a really bad game show. Lucy was so nervous she began to shake even more with suppressed laughter. "Open the box!" repeated the voice. That did it. Lucy burst out laughing. Joe prodded her in the ribs. "Shut up!" But Lucy couldn't shut up, and when the lid was lifted she was choking with laughter. Crazy thoughts raced through Joe's mind. They would be abandoned in the desert. They would be sold into slavery. They would be executed for spying. All because of a cat. He looked around him. The cat was nowhere to be seen. The next moment the whole room began to clap and cheer. Voices shouted, "It is a good sign! Our king will be happy in his new life." A man in a white and scarlet headdress appeared behind him. It was almost as if he had been in the box with them. Lucy jumped and her hand flew to her mouth. The man's chest was bare, except for a wide, flat necklace of gold and green discs. Around his waist he wore a knee-length kilt fastened with a cat's head clasp. "I am Priest Irie," said the man. He bowed low. "You are our honoured guests." Lucy stared into the man's face. There was something strange about his eyes. What was it? She took his hand and stepped like a film star from the painted box. "Wow," muttered Joe under his breath. Over 100 people were looking at them. Suddenly embarrassed, Lucy brushed the sand from her cotton leggings and tried to pull her sweatshirt straight. "You got twigs in your hair," she hissed to Joe. Joe looked down at his beaten-up trainers and pretended he hadn't heard. There was no way he was going to pull twigs out of his hair with 100 pairs of Egyptian eyes watching him. There was a short, sharp clap of hands. Everyone turned towards the raised platform where a woman was standing. Her black-lined eyes looked huge in her long, bony face. Her lips were scarlet. Black hair, woven with gold thread, hung in glossy braids to her shoulders. "I am Hathor, High Priestess of Ra," she said. "You are the sign we have been waiting for." The sound of her voice made the hairs on Lucy's body stand on end. Priest Irie led them forward. Joe and Lucy could hear the flap of their trainers on the tiled floor as they walked the length of the room. "We should kneel," said Joe out of the corner of his mouth. Behind the High Priestess, 2 frightened-looking men fanned the air with ostrich feathers. Their faces were tight and wary. The priest caught Lucy's eye. "Lie flat on the floor," whispered Lucy. "Okay," said Joe. The floor was cold and slightly sticky, but they kept their noses pressed to the tiles. At last the High Priestess grunted and motioned them to rise. As they scrambled to their feet, a hush filled the room, and Lucy suddenly realised they were expected to speak. But what should they say? And what if they got it wrong? Irie laid his hands on their shoulders. Words came into Lucy's head. "We are honoured to serve the God King," she said. "May his path to the afterlife be smooth," said Joe. He looked as surprised at himself as Lucy did. The High Priestess leant forward and touched them both on the forehead. "You have spoken true," she said. "You are among friends." Lucy looked at the priest. His face didn't move, but something glittered in his yellow eyes. "That was you," thought Lucy. "You put those words into our mouths." As if a signal had been given, 3 shaven-headed musicians picked up their instruments and began to play. There was a harp and a flute and something that looked a little like a guitar. "Come," said a voice behind Lucy. "I must prepare you." Lucy stared at a girl her own age. She had almond-shaped eyes and wore a long white cotton dress. Its folds were fastened by a cat's head brooch. "I am Kaya," said the girl simply. "I serve Priest Irie. He has prepared us for your arrival." "He has?" Kaya nodded. "I know everything about you." "What did he tell you?" asked Lucy, afraid at the same time of what she might hear. "You are messengers from faraway stars," Kaya replied, "sent by our gods on a mission both wonderful and—" She seemed lost for words. Lucy stared at her. What were the words she couldn't say? Dangerous? Doomed? "Mysterious," said Kaya finally. Lucy looked around the room. Slowly she was aware that people were leaving and the wonderful music had stopped. A cold sweat spread across her body. Whatever their mysterious mission was, everyone else seemed to know about it but them. "Why are people leaving?" she asked, trying to keep the tremble out of her voice. "They're going to get ready for the procession," said Kaya gently, "and so must we." She laid a light, cool hand on Lucy's arm. Lucy pulled back her arm. "What procession?" Kaya's dark brown eyes grew wide and her mouth opened in amazement. "You don't know?" "We know nothing," said Lucy. As she spoke, she felt tears pricking her eyes. "Do not be afraid," said Kaya. "You are among friends." Lucy allowed herself to be steered to a quiet part of the room. "Our God King, Tutankhamun, died 70 days ago," replied Kaya in a low voice. "He is prepared for his funeral procession. We have been waiting for a sign to begin the procession. You and your brother are the sign." "He is prepared?" Lucy thought of the bandaged body she had seen at the British Museum. "You mean the king is a—" She couldn't bring herself to say mummy. Somehow it didn't seem respectful. Kaya nodded. "My uncle practices the noble art. He told me." She took a deep breath. "Our king's body is preserved with secret salts and herbs. Then it is wrapped in linen. Now it will last forever, and his soul can travel to the other world." "The other world?" Lucy quickly looked around her. "Where's Joe?" "He is being prepared," replied Kaya. "What?" Lucy's voice was high and panicky. The few remaining people turned and looked at them. Kaya lowered her voice to little more than a whisper. "Trust me," she said. "He is with my brother." "Why? Where has he taken him?" "You must understand that your own garments are not appropriate for such an occasion," said Kaya matter-of-factly. "He is being bathed and dressed." Lucy looked down at her grubby trainers and her sweatshirt. She managed a small smile. "Yes, I understand." She followed Kaya along a corridor past a group of children. Their heads were completely shaved, except for one side lock of black hair, which was carefully braided and held together with a gold clasp. They looked so peculiar. Lucy stopped and stared. She touched her own hair. "You're not going to—" Kaya burst out laughing. "That is the mark of a noble child. Surely you cannot think of yourself as still being a child." Lucy blushed. "Of course not." She looked at the children. What did they remind her of? "They look just like punks, don't they?" It was the voice Lucy wanted to hear. "Joe!" she cried. But the Joe who was standing in front of her didn't look anything like the Joe she knew. For a moment she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wore a white linen kilt that came down to his knees, but his knees weren't white and knobbly anymore. His skin was dyed a deep orange. "Back rubbed me with coloured mud," said Joe, grinning. His teeth looked white in his sun-tanned face. "And he gave me this to wear. It's made from real hair." Joe flipped a curtain of glossy black braids across his face and did a couple of dance steps. "What do you think?" Before Lucy could reply, Kaya pulled her firmly by the hand. "There's no time to lose," she said. "You must be made ready yourself." Now that she had seen Joe, Lucy wasn't so worried anymore. She let herself be led away. "I'll see you later," she said to Joe. Then, over her shoulder, she added, "By the way, your mascara's smudged."